Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz states that the Israeli army is preparing to prevent events similar to those of October the 7th in the West Bank. UN Special Envoy for Syria Geir Pedersen urges Israel to stop its violations in Syrian territory. And French Special Envoy to Lebanon, Jean-Yves Le Drian, meets with the Lebanese officials in Beirut ahead of the parliament's presidential vote. And it's 8 p.m. Cairo local time, and it's Salma Al-Fei. You're now watching Qnews. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in the West Bank. The Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has stated that the Israeli army is preparing to prevent events similar to those of October the 7th in the West Bank. Katz claimed that the West Bank has become a central threat to Israel and emphasized that Israel is preparing a strong response to the escalating threat to residents of the West Bank settlements. An Israeli airstrike on Tubas, north of the occupied West Bank, has killed 3 Palestinians, including 2 children. Local resources reported that the airstrike targeted a residential area in the town of Tamoun. Earlier this morning, the occupation forces stormed the town of Tamoun, deployed snipers and infantry in several parts of it, claiming to have struck a terrorist cell. The Israeli occupation forces have detained over 45 people from the occupied West Bank during the last 24 hours. The detainees included former detainees, a woman and a child. Local media reported that the detention operations were accompanied by widespread abuse and assaults against detainees and their families. Additionally, the occupation forces intensified field investigations in the town of Sair. And in Gaza, Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis, South Gaza, has announced that the health services will be suspended with the exception of intensive care and operations departments due to the fuel shortage crisis. The statement warned of a humanitarian and health disaster that threatens the lives of patients by suffocating them in intensive care beds, noting that the complex's generators have completely stopped and that only a small generator is working now. The medical complex pointed out that the amount of fuel in the complex is sufficient to operate the small generator for only 3 hours, stressing that the complex needs 5,500 liters of diesel per day to ensure the continuation of medical services. Several Palestinians have been killed and many were injured in the 460th day of the ongoing Israeli aggression on Gaza. Palestinian media reported that the occupation forces have targeted shelters and inhabited homes in Khan Yunis. They also bombed a home in the Sheikh Radwan area of North Gaza. Israeli occupation warplanes have bombed a school housing displaced people in Jabalia, killing 4 Palestinians and injuring several others. Local media also reported that occupation forces continued their artillery shelling of Tal el-Hawa neighborhood southwest of Gaza City and bombed a family home, killing an infant. Gaza-based health authorities have confirmed that Palestinian death toll from the ongoing Israeli aggression on Gaza Strip has surged to over 45,900, with more than 109,000 others wounded. They added that the Israeli occupation army committed 6 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours, killing 51 Palestinians and injuring 78 others. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees has stated that hospitals in Gaza have become death traps. In a post on X, it explained that families in Gaza are torn apart and children are freezing to death with starvation cutting lives short. Additionally, the statement urged for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza Strip. The British Foreign Office has stated that Israel's decision to ban the activities of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees should not come into effect. They added that the UNRWA has a clear authority and its work is absolutely essential to support Palestinian refugees and provide aid and services. The International Court of Justice has announced that Ireland has joined South Africa's genocide case against Israel. In a brief press statement, the ICJ said that Ireland had on Monday joined Nicaragua, Colombia, Mexico, Libya, Bolivia, Turkey, the Maldives, Chile, Spain, and the State of Palestine in asking to intervene in the case. South Africa first filed its case against Israel in December 2023, accusing the country of committing genocide during its ongoing offensive in the Gaza Strip. Israel has denied that it is engaged in genocide and continues to fight South Africa in court. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is working urgently to secure a Gaza ceasefire before the Biden administration concludes, while President-elect Trump sets a critical deadline for hostages' release.
Finally, with regard to the Middle East.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making a final effort to secure a Gaza ceasefire before the Biden administration ends. Speaking in South Korea, Blinken expressed optimism for a deal within 2 weeks, though he acknowledged delays may still occur. Israeli officials are engaging in talks in Qatar, mediated by Egypt and Qatar, but significant disagreements continue to block a truce that has eluded negotiators for over a year.
Horrible war that's going on in
President-elect Donald Trump has issued a stern warning, threatening severe consequences if Hamas fails to release hostages before his January 20th inauguration, a date seen by many as a critical deadline for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Congress formally certified Trump's election victory in a session presided over by Vice President Kamala Harris, contrasting sharply with the Capitol riot during the 2020 certification process.
538.
In Gaza, Israeli airstrikes over the weekend killed at least 100 people, according to local health officials. Nearly all of Gaza's 2.3 million residents are living in makeshift shelters, enduring severe winter conditions and worsening floods. As negotiations continue, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza grows more desperate, with millions in urgent need of aid and protection.
Palestinian women in Qnews searched through rubble, collecting tiles and any materials they could salvage from homes destroyed by Israeli strikes. A mother said she would use the tiles to reinforce the floor of her makeshift tent to protect her family from rain. Another woman mentioned finding wood, which she would use for heating or cooking. The misery of the displaced is worsened by winter's harsh cold as they endure Israeli attacks with little shelter or warmth. And now we move on to the latest developments in Syria. And Egypt's permanent representative to the UN, Osama Abdel Khaliq, says Egypt supports efforts to build Syria with pure Syrian national ownership that includes everyone. Abdel Khaliq added that the Arab group stresses the sovereignty, integrity, unity, and stability of Syria and calls for intensifying efforts to address the humanitarian situation in Syria. He added that Egypt supports Arab political efforts in Syria. The United Nations Security Council has met to discuss developments in Syria. The special envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, Geir Pedersen, has stated that Israel should stop its violations in Syrian territory. He added that Daesh poses a major threat to Syria's stability and that he welcomes the U.S. government's stance on sanctions on Syria.
Appropriate action on designations too, and full reconvening.
Iran's president and Iraq's prime minister discussed the situation in Syria during talks in Tehran, agreeing that Syria's stability is the key to the stability of the entire region. They called for a comprehensive political solution that puts an end to foreign interventions that harm the interests of the Syrian people. Meanwhile, in Syria, the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has stated that EU sanctions on Syria could be lifted quickly. Barrot added that they are going on ongoing discussions with the EU partners about the possibility of lifting other sanctions contingent on progress in areas such as women's rights and security in Syria.
Soit elle ne le fait pas, et alors il faudra qu'elle consente à rendre aux États membres.
Street vendors selling fuel are lining a highway in Damascus, earning their livelihood and giving Syrians easy access to gasoline and diesel. Before Assad's fall, Syrians had limited access to gasoline and diesel and had to wait to receive messages from the state that determined when and how much subsidized fuel they could buy. Maher Khalil El Hassan, the trade minister in Syria's caretaker government, said on Monday the country is unable to make deals to import fuel, wheat, or other key goods due to strict U.S. sanctions, despite many countries, including Gulf states, wanting to do so. Passengers at the Damascus airport have reunited with their families as international flights resumed for the first time since the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime last month. The first flight to land in the Syrian capital was a Qatar Airways flight from Doha, while a Syrian Airlines flight with 145 passengers on board left Damascus for Sharjah airport in the United Arab Emirates, UAE. In 2012, most airline companies halted their flights to and from Damascus airport. And now we move to the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
French Special Envoy to Lebanon, Jean-Yves Le Drian, has met with the Lebanese officials in Beirut ahead of the parliament's presidential vote. The meeting is part of Le Drian's ongoing consultations with the Lebanese political factions, which focus on the current political developments at both local and regional levels. And Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, Badr Abdelati, has stressed the need to reach a Lebanese consensus with pure national ownership and without external dictates to end the presidential vacuum in Lebanon. Speaking with Nabih Berri, the Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament, stressing that Egypt will continue to provide all forms of support to Lebanon. For his part, Nabih Berri expressed his deep appreciation to Egypt's president for his continuous support for Lebanon on the political and humanitarian levels, appreciating Egypt's standing by Lebanon at this critical stage. And in Lebanon, the Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri has confirmed that a parliamentary session will be held on January the 9th to elect a new president. Leading contenders include Army Commander General Joseph Aoun, Lebanese Forces leader Samir Gaga. Other potential candidates are Interim General Security Chief Ilyas El-Baysari, lawmakers Namat Frem and Ibrahim Kanaan, and former ministers Jihad Azur, Ziad Baroud and Jean-Louis Ardahi. A candidate needs 2/3 of the vote, 86 lawmakers, in the first stage, with an absolute majority required in subsequent rounds. The Lebanese National News Agency has reported that Israeli artillery targeted the Marja plane, aiming at the outskirts of the town of Burj el-Muluk in South Lebanon. The agency also stated that the occupation army targeted a house on the outskirts of Bint Jbeil towards Maroun el-Ras, south of Lebanon, marking the third home to be hit since Wednesday morning. The Lebanese army has continued deployment in the southern coastal town of Naqoura in coordination with the UN peacekeeping force UNIFIL as Israeli forces withdraw. Naqoura is the third town the Israeli military withdraw from following the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel that came into effect over a month ago. The withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Naqoura was brokered by the U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein and went into effect on November the 27th. The army has urged residents to stay away and adhere to safety instructions. The Lebanese army has stated that one soldier has been injured following clashes near Syria-Lebanon border last week. The incident took place near the border town of Sirgaya in southwestern Syria after people on the Syrian side allegedly attempted to reopen an illegal border crossing using a bulldozer. The new transitional government in Damascus recently introduced new entry regulations for Lebanese citizens who wish to visit Syria. Lebanese travelers must now secure a Syrian sponsor and provide proof of funds worth $2,000 and a hotel booking. Previously, Lebanese citizens were allowed to enter Syria with just an ID card. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has emphasized the importance of cooperation between Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece to address Middle East developments and achieve stability with the aim of preventing further conflict escalation. In his speech at the Egyptian Cypriot Greek Summit, President el-Sisi called for intensified efforts to calm the region and address crises like the wars in Gaza and Lebanon and achieve stability in Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Sudan. He also warned against escalating the conflict into a comprehensive war, which would have catastrophic political, economic, and security repercussions, including unprecedented waves of displaced persons and illegal immigration. The joint declaration of the 10th Trilateral Summit has affirmed a collective commitment to peace and stability in the Mediterranean, Middle East, and North Africa. The joint declaration of the 10th Trilateral Summit expresses concern over the Gaza conflict, calling for a ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and the release of hostages. It stresses addressing Middle East instability through the two-state solution and the establishment of a Palestinian state. Cyprus and Greece commended Egypt's efforts in Gaza and highlighted the need for a Syrian-led political process that respects Syria's sovereignty. The declaration also affirmed expanding tripartite cooperation to enhance regional and global stability. And meanwhile, in France, the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has stated the European Union will not let other nations attack its sovereign borders in response to comments by the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump on taking over Greenland. Barrot said he did not believe the U.S. would invade the vast Arctic island that has been part of Denmark for over 600 years. Trump's comments further outlined an expansionist agenda 2 weeks before he is sworn into office on June the 20th inauguration in Washington.
Est-ce que, si vous m'interrogez, je pense que les États-Unis envahiront le Groenland?
And now we move to the latest developments of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The Ukrainian military has said that Russia launched a total of 64 drones at the country overnight. Of those drones, Ukraine's Air Force shot down 41, while 22 imitator drones did not reach their targets, the Air Force added. According to the local authorities, drone debris fell on a private residence in the Kiev region, damaging its facade and windows without causing any casualties. The Consulate General of Poland has been closed in St. Petersburg in Russia. Russia decided to close Poland's Consulate General in December 2024 in response to Poland's decision to close the Russian consulate in Poznan. The Russian Foreign Ministry said in a statement it was also declaring 3 of the Polish consulate's diplomatic staff members persona non grata and that they would have to leave Russia by a certain date. The Russian military has announced launching assaults on Ukrainian forces across several fronts, while Ukraine said its forces conducted a precision strike on Russia's command post in the Kursk region. Russia's Ministry of Defense reported that its troops destroyed enemy tanks, howitzers, armored vehicles, and ammo depots in the last 24 hours, while air defense systems downed 50 Ukrainian drones. Meanwhile, Ukraine's General Staff reported 128 combat clashes with heavy fighting in the Kurakohovi area where Ukrainian forces repelled 14 Russian assaults. Ukraine also claimed a strike on a Russian naval infantry headquarters in the Kursk region. And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here's what we have been covering. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz states that the Israeli army is preparing to prevent events similar to those of October the 7th in the West Bank. UN Special Envoy for Syria Geir Pedersen urges Israel to stop its violations in Syrian territory. French Special Envoy to Lebanon, Jean-Yves Le Drian, meets with the Lebanese officials in Beirut ahead of the parliament's presidential vote. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. And thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.